We also have something called IAM groups. Now, a group is a collection of IAM users. So, what you can do is that you can create a group and put users in that group and attach policies to groups rather than at user level. Because what happens in that case, the policy management or permission management becomes very easy. So, let's say you have a new user or admin user. What you do is that you just add that user to the admin group, and admin group has all the policies and permissions attached. Now if an user leaves that organization or leaves that admin group, you remove the user from the group, so the permission would automatically be gone. So if you do not use group and let's say you do it at individual user level, it becomes really tedious, cumbersome and error prone to basically miss a lot of permissions, and maybe even if the user leaves the group, he or she might be having some users along with him or her, which is definitely not a good practice. So it's always good to create groups and add users to those groups. Even if that particular group has only one user, that is perfectly fine, because you never know whether the team would be increased or not. It's always a good practice to create groups, add user to groups, and basically attach the policies to the groups rather than to individual users. So as I said, policies can be attached to IAM groups also. Then we have IAM roles, and what I'll be talking about is service roles, not the user roles, because user roles will not be needed that much in data engineering, but service roles are very important. So what does it mean? What is meant by service roles? So let's say we have S3 and we have an S3 bucket and we have multiple objects in that bucket. And you have services like EC2 which wants to read from S3 bucket. Similarly, we have Redshift clustered which wants to read from S3 bucket, and Glue which wants to read an object from S3 bucket. So what we have to do is that we'll have to attach a role to these individual services. So we'll have to create service roles and attach to those roles to these services. Otherwise, you can run a command inside of EC2, but that command will not be able to copy anything in the from S3 to EC2 local store. Same is the case with Redshift also. Even if you run copy command to copy files from S3 objects to Redshift tables, it will not be possible because Redshift service will not have access to read from S3 service. So these are individual services and they also need permissions from one another to perform certain tasks. And what does these roles contain? These roles would contain permission to S3 so that the services can actually read objects from S3. And there's something called trust policy also, and those policies would be attached to the roles. For this role in the trust policy, it would be mentioned that EC2 service can use this role. For the second one, in the trust policy, it would be mentioned that Redshift service can use this role. And for the third one, in the trust policy, it would be mentioned that Glue service can use this role. So we'll have to create three different roles. Even though the permissions are same for all the three roles, trust policy is different. So that's why we'll have to create three different roles, or we can actually add all the three services in the trust policy also. So how do we mention the trust policy or trust relationship? This is how we do it. We mention the version as usual. Then in the statement, in the effect, we mention allow, and there is no resource. Instead of resource, we have principal. And in principal, we mention the service. It can be ec2.amazonaws.com, and it can be redshift.amazonaws.com. It can be emr.amazonaws.com. And in the action, we'll have to mention STS assume role. So we cannot mention anything else, only STS assume role. So let's do some hands-on. What I'll do is that I'll launch an EC2 instance in 3IAM private subnet 1C. And we'll use this AWS S3 CP command to copy an object from S3 to EC2 storage. And I should not be able to do so because EC2 service will not have any access to S3 service. Then we'll create a role with read access to S3 and attach it to EC2 instance. and then we'll perform the same copy object operation. Also, we'll try to copy file from EC2 to S3. We'll see whether it works or not. If not, then we'll have to make changes in the role also. Now what will I do? I'll make a small change. Instead of private subnet, I'll use a public subnet. So I'll be launching the EC2 instance in 3 IAM public subnet 1A rather than private subnet. The reason I'm using public subnet, because again I won't have the overhead to use the bash and host and then login, etc., etc. So let's do that straightforward. Even if we use EC2 instance in the public subnet, the request would go via internet and it should work like private subnet only, because if we use private subnet, we'll have to create VPC endpoint also. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. Now I'm not using the admin user because admin user has limited access. I'll be using the root user only, and that is perfectly fine because I want to show you the usage of service role rather than individual user role. So let me go ahead and create an instance. I'll be using the security group that I had created, security group for public subnet 1A, and that's all. Let me go ahead and launch the EC2 instance. Now, one thing is that you might have seen that there's no option of attaching any IAM role. So how do you do that? So this is the EC2 instance, and the way to attach IAM role is to basically go to actions, click on security, and then modify IAM role. Currently, this EC2 instance does not have any IAM role. So if I click on cancel and then click on security here, and if you see there are security groups attached to it. So this is the security group, but there is no IAM role. So if you see, the IAM role is blank. Now what am I going to do is that I'll try to copy, let's say, one of the codes like orders OLTP app serverless .py code. So I have this EC2 instance up and running. So let me first log into the EC2 instance. I'm inside of this EC2 instance, then I'll have to install AWS CLI, because without AWS CLI, I cannot use the AWS S3 CP command. And this is the command. Okay, I think there's no access. The security group is stopping this. Let me change the security group. So this is the security group, sec group public 1A. Inbound rule should be fine on port 22, but in outbound rule, I think I have allowed only SSH on port 22. So let me go ahead and change that. I'll add all traffic to internet. So that's all. I'll save it, and it worked, and I have this AWS CLI v2.zip installed, and let me unzip this, and AWS command line has been installed. So if I type AWS-version, it is showing me. So now let me run the AWS CP command to copy this particular code, orders dwh which is in DAWS v1 codes, in the bucket www.3iam.in, and I'll try to copy it in my local machine. So it says unable to locate credentials. So this is what the problem is. So first of all, the user was EC2 user, and EC2 user does not have any permission. So there are two ways of doing it. One is, maybe I can use admin user. I can actually set up or configure admin user to, let's say, perform this operation. So I'll have to set up the access key for admin user so that admin user can do this, or else I can use a service role. So let me show you how to use service role. So I'll be creating a service role wherein EC2 should be allowed to read from S3. And this is the console. Again, I'll have to go to IAM and click on roles, and I'll be creating a role. So here we have multiple options like AWS service, AWS account, web identity, custom trust policy, SAML federation. So we'll be using AWS service, but just to give a high level overview, if we mention AWS account, it allows entities in other AWS accounts to access resources in my account. Web identity is basically like Google account, Amazon account, Facebook account, etc. And then we have SAML base, so SAML federation. So if there are SAML authentication or SAML authorization, we can use that, and we can create a custom trust policy also. Now in the use case, I'll have to mention the service, and the service would be EC2. So now there are so many things available: EC2 role for systems manager, EC2 spot fleet role, spot fleet auto scaling, spot instances, spot fleet, so on and so forth. You do not need any one of these. I want only EC2. So let's select EC2, and what will I do is I will add a permission or policy, and I'll use AWS managed policy. I'll not create a policy on my own. So for S3, there are two access. One is S3 full access, and then we have S3 read only access. So let's select S3 read only access. Click on next. So the role name is 3 IAM Service Role, and here if you see, the principal is service ec2.amazonaws.com, and the effect is assume role, and the permission is S3 read only access. Click on create role. So the role has been created, 3 IAM service role. I click on this again, and I want to show you the trust relationship one more time. So this is the actual permission or policy that this role has, and then you have trust relationship, and this is where we are mentioning that which service is allowed to perform this operation, and we are saying that EC2 service is allowed, and we are mentioning that in the principal option with service ec2.amazonaws.com. Now what I have to do is that I'll have to associate this service role with the EC2 instance. Now as you can see, we have ARN, we have instance profile ARN also. So what is instance profile ARN? This is a little different. This is basically this ARN can be used to attach this role to the EC2 instance using command line. Of course, we'll not use command line. What will I do? I'll go to actions, click on security and modify IAM role, and then I will select 3 IAM service role and then update service role. So this role has been attached to the EC2 instance. And now if I run S3 CP, I should be able to see that the file has been downloaded. So if you see, orders dwh app.py has been downloaded. Now let me try to copy this particular file to S3, this bucket, to the same bucket. So it will be AWS S3 CP, same command, and just change it. And now again it will, the upload would be failed, saying that access is denied. So it is not authorized to perform S3 put object on resource. Remember that in the role I had mentioned only read only access. So let me just show you the role again. In the permissions, I have Amazon S3 read only access. That's why I'm getting this particular error. So this is the error: access denied, user whatever role is not authorized to perform S3 put object on resource, so on and so forth. Let's change this and try to upload this object again. Now I'll add another permission. So this time I'll add S3 full access. So permission has been added. Now I do not have to attach this IAM role to EC2 again because the role is already attached, and I have just attached a policy or a permission to the role. And now if I run the same command again, it should work. And as you can see, it has uploaded. And if I go back to the S3 bucket, which is 3iam.in, I should be able to see AWS CLI v2.zip file. As you can see, this is the file, AWS CLI v2.zip. It has been uploaded. So let's do one more hands-on. In this case, what will I do? I'll use Redshift copy command to copy files from S3 into a table, and we'll see whether the copy command works or not. Then we'll create a role with appropriate access and attach it to Redshift, provision cluster or serverless workgroup, whichever is fine, and we'll run the copy command again. So after that, I'll try running unload command also. If it does not work, we'll have to take necessary changes or make necessary changes in the role so that unload command also works. All right, I have this Redshift serverless namespace and Redshift serverless work group created. And if I click on Redshift serverless namespace, click on security and encryption. So there's this role associated with it. What will I do is that I'll remove all the access from this role. So the name of the role is data engineering on AWS Redshift S3 full access role. And if I see the permissions, there are a lot of permissions. I'll remove all the permissions. And in the trust relationship, it is similar to previous. In the principal, instead of ec2.amazonaws.com, we have redshift.amazonaws.com. And the action is STS assume role. So now this is the ARN of the role, and I would need this ARN. So this role is attached to the Redshift serverless namespace. What I'll do is that I'll copy the customers file, which is customer underscore one.csv. And this is the role of the ARN that I have shown you. It does not have any permission, by the way. So let us go ahead and run this in serverless workgroup and 3 IAM database that I had created. All right, so let me execute this. And it says S3 service exception user. So user assumed role is not authorized to perform S3 list bucket. So basically it's an authentication error. So what will I do now is let me go ahead and change this role, which is data engineering on AWS Redshift full access, and let me add S3 read access. Amazon S3 read only access, add permissions, and it has been added. So now let's try to run this command again. So as you can see, the command is running. So the customer table has been loaded. Approximately 1.5 million records were loaded successfully. Now what will I do is I'll run the unload command also. So this is the unload command, select star from retail.customers, and I'm only exporting 100 rows to this bucket, deep test data bucket, customers, large data set, IAM service role. In this particular folder, the file should be extracted, and with this IAM role. Now let's execute this command. Okay, limit clause is not supported actually in unload. That is fine. So let me execute this again, and it should fail because I do not have write access to this particular bucket. So again, S3 service exception, user blah 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 is not authorized to perform S3 put object on this particular resource, which is similar error that we had seen in EC2 also. So now what will I do? I will again add a permission. So let me attach S3 full access, add permissions, and run the code or run the command again rather. And now it is running, and if I go to that bucket and folder, so if you see I have this folder created IAM service role, and if I click here, there should be some objects coming in later on. The maximum file size is 5 MB. So if you see, there are a lot of files which have been created. So approximately 78 million rows have been exported. So this time it worked because the role or the service role has access to write object in the S3 bucket. So this is how service roles work, and service role is very important because again, I mean, we'll be using Athena, we'll be using S3, we'll be using Redshift, we'll be using Hive. In all the cases, we need to provide access to other services. So service role plays a very important or crucial role in performing those operations. That's all about IAM. Thanks a lot for tuning in.